Hi there. I want to talk a little bit about playing in tune on the cello when you go out of the lower positions, when you play scales that go up into higher positions. You probably know that the cello is a proportional instrument, and that means that the notes on this part of the cello are wider apart than the notes on that part of the cello. And unfortunately, the way we use our hands has to change when we go to the different parts of the instrument. In the lower parts of the cello, it seems like our fingers are approximately the same distance. They aren't really. Actually, there's more space between 1 and 2 than there is between 3 and 4, but that actually works well in our hand because our hand is able to do a little bit more space between 1 and 2. But basically, most people say, we sort of say, make your fingers equidistant to get those half steps. And so what I'm doing today is I'm kind of measuring how far away my fingertips are. So like between my first finger and my second finger, it's about 1.5 inches. I'm sorry I don't have a metric ruler right here, but I don't. It's about 1.5 inches of distance for this half step between 1 and 2. When I go up an octave higher, that half step is so close together that my fingertips are touching. It's like 5/8 of an inch. I measured it already. But so this is a really, really big difference in the proportion of what's going on here. So that's an example of the notes getting closer together. But the biggest problem that we have is not just that we have to squish our hand up. It actually is that we have to open our hand out farther, because what happens when we go up is instead of staying all in half steps, we start doing whole steps between our fingers. And between 1 and 2 is not so bad because we have a big stretch there, but between 2 and 3 can feel really lousy. So I want to give you some tips about negotiating that. Okay, so if I am here, I'm going to play 2 whole steps, B to C sharp and C sharp to D sharp. So that's 2 whole steps in first position. This is the extension position. That should look familiar to you, this shape. If this does not look familiar to you, then you may need to go look at some videos. I have some posted about how to set up your hand for the extension shape so that you can play 2 whole steps in a row in lower positions. So here are those notes again. B, C sharp, and D sharp. And you'll notice that's a pretty big stretch between my 1 and my 4. Those notes, if I'm playing them in the upper positions, end up looking like this. That 4th finger doesn't get used at all. I'm doing 1, 2, 3 on whole steps up here. The problem that I get is these 2 notes, the C sharp and the D, which are between my 2 and my 3, that is a wider spacing because it's a whole step. So even though the notes are closer together, this whole step is a wider spacing between 2 and 3 than when I play 2 and 3 in a half step down in this part. So this weird thing happens where the notes are closer together, but your fingers have to be spread out farther. This is especially a problem in this area that we call 5th, 6th, and 7th position. There is a PDF that you can download that will show you these positions. I'm not going to show them on screen. I'm just going to talk through them. But if you want to go get this chart, I have a whole page that shows you where all the notes are for 5th, 6th, and 7th positions, which are also sometimes called the neck positions because you're right here at the neck. It's super awkward, and actually I have a small hand, so some stuff I can't even do with my shape of hand, and so I do some variations sometimes for myself. But basically, if I'm going in this position, which is the first position where I stop using my 4th finger, 5th position, F, G, and A. And that is so wide for my hand, this 2, 3 here. Remember, before, I'm going to get my ruler out. If I'm doing a half step here, okay, here's my ruler. That is a distance of, I'm measuring from center of finger to center of finger. It's a little hard to do it. That's approximately like 1.25 inches maybe in that half step. When I do it here, like a whole step, whew, that is enormous. It is almost 2 inches wide. Just a little under 2 inches. So in other words, my hand, which has gotten really used to the shape of spacing between my fingers here now has to do something fairly radical. So a couple of ideas for using your hand. One of them is the pivot. Unless you have really big hands or exceptionally stretchy hands, long fingers, really, really flexible webbing, pretty much for all players, I recommend the pivot where you don't keep your first finger down. And when I do that, I can get by with it. I was actually trained to go forward by keeping my second finger bent and trying to reach forward. I can't really do that. I have hurt my hand during this, the third finger, reach your third finger out thing. So I do not advise that you try that method. You'll notice that I swing around. So I do this kind of squaring off where I take my thumb off completely. Okay, great, I overshot it. So that's the first thing, is trying to negotiate that. The other problem that we get when we're dealing with these positions is that your second finger changes place. So in other words, back here, yes, sometimes my second finger does either an extension or a half step, but that's a really proscribed shape in the hand. When I get to these upper positions, sometimes I have a half step between 1 and 2 and then a whole step between 2 and 3, and you'll notice every time I do that, so as not to strain my hand, I've got that thumb off, and I know that that looks weird, and I am a person that believes in holding your thumb on the neck whenever you can, but like literally I can't in this position. So sometimes we have a half step and then a whole step, and sometimes a whole step and a half step there, and different variations of then that. Sometimes it's 2 holes. So in order to play efficiently in scales that go up in this area, you need to have some sense of that distance between where your whole steps are and where your half steps are. And of course, intonation comes from your brain. It comes from listening and adjusting as you go. But hopefully, if you try a couple of different things, either and or the pivot idea, you may be able to go forward with the pivot and not have to take your hand all the way out. If pivoting and getting off your first finger doesn't work by itself, try also doing it in conjunction with swinging your hand out in this direction. So then, once you have kind of worked through the different positions, then I'd advise doing something like the 3 octave scales, just the top octave. And here's my issues. Whole step, half step. I really think about, is it a whole step or a half step? Whole step. And this is going to now go up to thumb position. Whole step, half step. Whole step. Etc. Just working through the shifts that go through that area of the cello and being really careful about finger placement between where your second finger is. Is your second finger a whole step or a half step away from the first finger, and a whole step or a half step away from the third finger? And see if you can train your hand to be able to find those shapes more easily. Good luck.